Happy Friday. Welcome to the briefing room. I'm John Santucci, coming to you from the Washington Bureau of ABC News. Devin Dwyer has the day off, but never fear, you are stuck with me. And someone you're not stuck with anymore, Bill Shine, the White House Communications Director, stepping down today. That is President Trump's fifth communications director now leaving the team. Let's bring in ABC's Jordan Phelps. She's over at the White House, has been watching this one with us all day. And Jordan, we were touching base earlier as we were getting wind something was going on. We had spoken around 12 o'clock and we were starting to get wind of this. And you had ran up to upper press in the White House and saw a little bit of a gathering up there as they were trying to figure out what to do about the number 5 communications director.
Yeah, John, things really evolved quickly here at the White House. First, I heard from you with a tip that someone might be leaving the West Wing today, so I immediately marched up to Bill Shine's office to see what was up. First, he was just sitting behind his desk, his office door open like normal. But then it became clear pretty quickly, John, that things were not normal. He kept telling me, "You'd have to get back to me, you have to get back to me," kind of pushed me out and walked into Sarah Sanders' office hurriedly. There was a huddle behind closed doors. And John, it was just minutes later, really, that we heard from Sarah Sanders that Bill Shine had put in his resignation with President Trump last night, that the president had accepted it, and he's back to the campaign.
Yeah, and we got a statement from Bill Shine shortly after that, and I think we have that to throw up on screen. It reads in part, "Serving President Trump and this country have been the most rewarding experience of my entire life. To be a small part of this team has done a great thing for the American people. I'm looking forward to working on President Trump's re-election campaign." Of course, Jordan, the president was pretty excited about this hire. The former president of Fox News, someone that had run a major network, thinking they could help steer the White House messaging.
Yeah, that's what it really all comes down to, John. The president brought in Bill Shine sort of with this idea that he would help shape coverage, improve coverage. And there's a sense here that he hadn't delivered on that promise. This comes days after a New Yorker profile kind of summed this all up, where a source is quoted as saying Trump thought he was getting Roger Ailes, but instead got Roger Ailes' gopher in Bill Shine, and he wasn't able to deliver for the president, it seems, and that might have been the final straw. But, John, I should say that the White House is spinning this, saying that he left on perfectly pleasant terms. Well,
he's re-employed, as we should say, and you noted right there he is joining the Trump 2020 campaign. And this all comes on the heels of the president and the first lady heading down to Alabama. They're touring some of the damage from the storm that hit there earlier this week. I want to bring in ABC's Rachel Scott. She's been on the ground from the beginning. And Rachel, you've been crisscrossing the area, talking to local officials down there. What are some of the things that the president and the first lady are seeing on the ground right now?
Yeah, well, John, just take a look at where I am standing. This just shows you the power and the sheer force of those 170 mile per hour winds that rip through this area. Just take a look behind me. Those 170 mile per hour winds wrap this 18-wheeler behind me just around this tree right here. We do not know whether or not this driver made it out okay. Hopefully, he was not driving this vehicle at the time that the storm hit. But here in Beauregard, Alabama, where the president visited, this is at the center of the heartache and destruction. Officials tell me that all 23 lives that were lost were all killed in just 1 square mile of each other. Just right before we went live, I just hugged a resident here who said he lost 10 members of his family. 10 people out of the 23 came from just one family. So this community is simply devastated. They not only lost their property, but they also lost their neighbors. They lost members of their family. But, you know, today the president did receive somewhat of a warm welcome here. I mean, the residents here in Beauregard were happy to see him. You know, they said this is not about politics. We know in the past that sometimes the president has received a little bit of criticism on these trips, right, where he's touring some of the damage and destruction. The mayor of Puerto Rico called it a PR stunt. But here, the residents say, listen, this is not about politics. This is about getting help. And they welcome the president with open arms, saying if he's here to help us and he's here to get resources into this area and he needs to see this firsthand, then we would love for him to be here. I talked to one Trump supporter who was wearing a Trump 2020 hat, standing on the side of the street, waving at the president as the motorcade drove by, and he got emotional. And he said, listen, this is a small town. The small town town of Beauregard, right? I mean, in Alabama. He said, you know, national news, maybe you've never heard of it. But to us, it's a big deal, he said, that the president would take a trip all the way down here to the small town of Beauregard, Alabama, to meet with tornado victims and see some of this damage firsthand. And to him, he said that meant the world. He said, in fact, it was an early birthday gift. His birthday is next week. So just here on the ground here, I mean, just complete devastation as residents continue to comb through this area, trying to find anything that they could possibly salvage. But images like these, I mean, this is not hard to come by in this community. Homes completely toppled over, walls collapsed, and residents just have a long way to rebuild here.
ABC's Rachel Scott on the ground for us in Alabama. You can see all of Rachel's reporting at abcnews.com. Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate it. And thank you, Jordan Phelps, over at the White House. Coming back inside the Bureau now, one of the other topics that we're talking about today is what's happening up on Capitol Hill. They have a new ethics reform bill that's being brought to the floor. We'll see what happens with the Senate. I want to bring in ABC's Trish Turner. She's the commander-in-chief of our Capitol Hill unit. You hate every time I use that title. Yeah, well, you know, something has to get you to come back. So, all right, let's talk about this. This is a bill that President Trump is probably not going to like too much. I can think of one reason, but why don't you start and we'll see where you
There are so many. One begins with tax returns.
Yeah, that one.
but so this is the signature bill for the Democrats out of the campaign. So they campaigned on voting rights changes, campaign finance reform, sweeping ethics reform. There's so much that's packed into this bill. So that they even they even want to make Election Day a national holiday. But what you're talking about is the
big one.
The big one is mandating that presidents and vice presidents, referring to someone you know, you and I both know, mandatory release of 10 years of their tax returns.
Yeah, that's going to be a problem for Donald Trump because, you know, I only covered the campaign. Let me try to remember. He released, zero.
None.
Yeah. So how does that work, though, for him? He would have to be required, because he's running for re-election, if this was to pass, to go back and give all those tax returns.
Yeah, but thankfully for him, it's dead on arrival in the Senate, according to his friend and Republican leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell. So
wow, really
ain't gonna
stunning
pass.
thing.
And not only that, but you can imagine that President Trump might take some pleasure in vetoing this bill.
I think he would get out his big Sharpie and go to town with it. But
Democrats have other ways to get those tax returns.
And they certainly are. And you folks have been reporting on that on the Hill. The Ways and Means Committee certainly getting ready to contact the IRS.
We are really close to that. So we know that a letter is being created. We know that they are moving in that direction. And Speaker Pelosi was asked about that this week. She's all, full steam ahead. Her leadership office, the spokespeople there, have been speaking in really strong terms about it's time to get the tax returns. And all of that comes off the heels of Michael Cohen and his testimony on Wednesday.
Well, and we'll certainly be watching as more of those investigations start in the Hill. There is another big case that everyone is talking about, and that is the Paul Manafort case. Yesterday, Judge T.S. Ellis over in the Eastern District of Virginia handed down the first sentence on the former Trump campaign chairman, just 47 months. We're bringing in an expert for this one, Sandra Moser. She's the former chief of the fraud division, currently partner at Quinn Emanuel. Great to have you with us today.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
So you were watching this as we were. A very bizarre day yesterday because they were taking some breaks, how long this was going to. The judge wanted to think about this. But for everything we were reading and hearing what the guidelines could have added up to, being almost 2 decades in jail, only 47 months, a lot of outrage about that today.
There was a lot of outrage among
Is it justified?
Former prosecutors and not. Look, there was a common saying when I was in the Department of Justice, which is there are those who have not and those who have yachts. And that there's quite disparate treatment that often we see play out. But the reality is, of course, it's much more complicated than that, and this was certainly a complicated case. And the guidelines that guide or advise, which defense attorney for Manafort was certainly pointing out, they're not mandatory, and they are just a guideline for the court. And the court certainly had other ideas, both from the prosecutors as well as the independent United States Probation Office, which was the body to actually calculate that sentence that would have resulted in more than 230 months.
And Trish, you were in court every day for that trial. It seemed to go on forever. That judge from the beginning was already coming out, making comments against the special counsel's probe. I mean, in a way, I'm curious for you. It wasn't surprising
Not
to you,
at all.
right?
I must have sat through, and you know how this goes. Like, you sit through waiting for the case that you're waiting to watch. You could sit through as many as 20 sentencings, during a week as you're waiting to listen to your case on various occasions. And we would hear T.S. Ellis opine on how he just didn't think that the sentencing guidelines were fair. He could be really tough if somebody didn't express remorse. And I was actually surprised. Like, he sort of chastised Paul Manafort for not expressing remorse, but then he only gave him 4 years, and I was really surprised. Like,
yeah, there seems to be a disconnect there. Well, certainly the fact that he almost advised him to make sure that he did express remorse when he stands in the federal court in District of Columbia.
That was right. Well, that's just it. So now we've got a totally different judge in the District of Columbia. Amy Berman Jackson. She is tough. She has thrown Paul Manafort away for witness tampering. The charges there are a little different. If you're watching at home and you're thinking, okay, we got round 2 next week, maybe he'll get hit with a stiffer sentence, how does that sort of add up with witness tampering and some of those other charges we've seen there?
Sure. I mean, both of the cases comprise extremely serious charges, although I think the distinction that often plays out is not violent crime, and that distinction. However, I think the big question now is how Judge Jackson will address the concurrent versus consecutive piece of the sentencing. If the judge in Virginia had hit Manafort with a lengthy sentence, certainly one of the length that was recommended by probation and the Department of Justice, I think it was almost a foregone conclusion that the judge in the District of Columbia would have declared the sentence imposed there to run concurrently, meaning overlapping at the same time. I think that it's a wide open question at this point, and that consecutive time is likely to be imposed.
Do you think Judge Ellis it seemed like he really took into account that this was a victimless crime? Is that, I know there's some controversy over calling it that, but is that?
Sure. I think there's legitimate controversy over calling it that, and there are lots of different types of white-collar crime, but I think if you spoke to someone who was still in the department and tasked with vindicating those sorts of crimes, they would take offense to that, as well as the victims of mortgage fraud, Ponzi schemes, the greatest white-collar criminal of all, Bernie Madoff, who actually got a lengthy sentence. Certainly the people whose money he took did not consider it to be a victimless crime.
And the other thing that we're all talking about here, Sandra, and we appreciate you being with us today, is, Bob Mueller. What is going on with him? How many times have we reported it's coming? It's kind of coming, sort of coming.
Any day now.
Yeah, I know. I've lost count.
You and everybody else.
Yeah, no, I know. No, we're not special. We were all falling into the same hole here. But you know what's going on. I think as to what they're doing in this process, right? We understand that they're writing their final report. They're starting to close up. Everybody wondering how big this will be. Will it be 5 pages, 500, 5,000? The reality is that we don't know a lot of it because Bob Mueller is actually doing this pretty much by the book.
That's exactly right. I mean, you started out in your question saying to me, because I'm fresh out of the Department of Justice, that I know what's going on. To be clear,
you don't.
I don't, and I didn't there, and that's exactly how the process should play out. There are you can count on your hands number of people, rightly so, in the department that know what's going on, know what the timing is, know what the potential scope of the report is, and I'm sure that there is a lot of back and forth, frankly, about what the scope of that report is, what will be redacted, and that those debates will go on and extend on to be engaged in with Congress once the actual report is released from Mueller's team to the Attorney General.
And then, of course, Capitol Hill will weigh in and we'll go through that
Absolutely.
whole process.
I think that it could be a long process, but it is really, these are not regular times, so it's certainly difficult to predict.
Well, and one topic that we were talking about a little earlier today is pardons. And President Trump was asked about, did he discuss a pardon with his former fixer and personal attorney, Michael Cohen? He was asked about that earlier today before he left the White House. Here's what he had to say on that.
I don't even discuss it. The only one discussing it is you. I haven't discussed it. I know that in watching and seeing you folks at night, that Michael Cohen lied about the pardon. I know it's a stone-cold lie, and he's lied about a lot of things, but when he lied about the pardon, that was really a lie. And he knew all about pardons. His lawyers said that they went to my lawyers and asked for pardons. And I could go a step above that, but I won't go do it now.
Okay, well, he did actually do that not too long later via Twitter, go figure. He tweeted out that Michael Cohen had asked him directly about a pardon. Michael Cohen responding, saying that's a complete lie. But Sandra, let me bring this to you, because what Republicans on Capitol Hill are talking about is what Michael Cohen said during his public testimony before the House Oversight Committee about a week ago. He was asked, had he ever discussed a pardon with anyone in the Trump orbit? He said no. We saw that big headline from the Wall Street Journal earlier this week that Lanny Davis, his attorney, said at one point Mr. Cohen asked his legal representatives to make contact with the Trump legal team, discussing what a possibility could be. So if there's a perjury trap there, let's just say if, because we're not sure, they're still figuring it out, but how would that work if I'm a member of Congress, I'm a member of that committee? I refer that then to the DOJ to look into?
Sure. I mean, I think that that's one possible avenue. I'm not a congressional expert.
Right, I get that.
But in terms of the Department of Justice, I mean, they have the ability to open up a file and look at an offense. And so if there's, the U.S. Attorney's Office that's seeing the same things that you're talking about today and that witnessed the testimony, decided to pursue that and try to collect actual evidence in furtherance of that, then they can open the file and pursue it.
How literal does it have to be? If he says, I didn't discuss pardons, but we find out that his lawyer discussed pardons, like a former lawyer, is that?
It's a really good question, and I think the answer would ultimately, if a file was opened and there was a grand jury that determined to indict and it went before a jury of 12, they would make the determination about how literal it has to be. Those are very tough cases. What in the government you call a 1001 case or a perjury case, false statements. Those are incredibly difficult cases to bring. Rarely is
There's
it
like an intent
that,
component, right?
Absolutely, rarely is it that black and white where someone actually says black on one day and says white on another day. They say, well, I was trying to answer the question and I was adding nuance and it was complicated and I hadn't fully fleshed it out, and they're really difficult charges to bring.
We're going to have to see where it goes. Sandra Moser, thank you so much. Really
Thank
appreciate you joining
me.
us on this
Absolutely,
Friday. Thank you. And before we leave you on this Friday, one other topic that everyone's talking about, it is International Women's Day, and they are talking about the Women's Soccer League. They have filed suit saying they have not been fairly paid for quite some time. They issued a statement a little earlier today. It says the women's national team has enjoyed unparalleled success in international soccer. The team has won numerous, 3 World Cup titles, most recently in 2015 for Olympic gold medals. And it goes on to say that the WNT is currently ranked #1 in the world, a position that has held 10 out of the last 11 years. Very significant. Really hard work by them.
Really
and they
key
deserve to be paid
timing.
the same amount, don't they?
Really key timing, and of course they do.
Of course
they do, and it takes into account so much more. As I read it, it's like it's working conditions,
Yeah.
it's time of day
Travel.
they work, it's travel.
I mean, it's a lot that they go
all
through.
that goes into the job to make them equal with men.
Well, we wish them luck
Hear,
on
hear.
that, Sue. We're going to be covering it here at ABC. That is going to do it for us this Friday. For all the latest, you can log on to abcnews.com or download the ABC News app. For Trish Turner, I'm John Santucci in Washington. Have a good day.